Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farr. Chuck and I are recording this episode on June 15, 2026. It is day 1573 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion on Ukraine. Chuck and I are recording this episode the day after one of the largest combined assaults on Kyiv with both drones and missiles. More than 600 drones, some 70 missiles, ballistic cruise missiles, all aimed, of course, at Ukraine's cultural heritage. It was an abhorrent act.
Well, last night we had a abhorrent, absolutely, but fairly typical in the numbers of the Russian barrage. There were a total of 681 incoming threats, of which 611 were drones of various kinds, Geran, Shaheds, etc. The interception numbers were about the same, 71% of the missiles. And again, unfortunately, my latest data does not differentiate the important difference between a ballistic missile, that's one that goes way up into low Earth orbit and comes down, and a cruise missile, which does exactly the opposite. It comes in low and not even very fast, although the Russian missiles do sprint to target in low supersonic. Of those missiles, 71% were downed, 95% of the drones were downed. And overall, Alan, the interception rate of incoming threats was a very creditable 93%. But as we looked at the UNESCO targets that were hit, it tells you what the Russians were aiming at.
So, 1,000-year-old monastery, a monastery that is so ancient, it was constructed before Moscow was even a village. Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris was started 5 years after a lot of this monastery was completed. 1,000 years old, but terribly damaged in wars before, reconstructed by the Ukrainians. And the point to make is just as sacred today to Orthodox Ukrainian Christians as it was 1,000 years ago.
Well, it also tells you, so let's flash back again here to the numbers here a little bit. 93% of the incoming threats were intercepted or diverted by electronic warfare. What does that tell you? How many long-range precision strike munitions were actually aimed at that monastery in order to get 2 hits on it? So let's conservatively say 15 or 20 weapons were targeted, and that's it. It may be 50, because those cultural targets, Alan, unfortunately, they are priority targets. Not only do these Russian commanders and targeteers, they know exactly what they're shooting at. And, there is no depth to which these people won't stoop. And again, we hark on this often, but it was a very sobering moment for us both in Kharkiv to see a building that 6 Shaheds were aimed at. 6. Yeah. Random apartment building in a residential area. Explain that.
Just so people can put this into context. And this is the Kyiv Peshersk Lavra Dormition Cathedral. It is now the latest of more than 2,000 cultural sites that Russia has targeted. And this is since 2022. I'm not going back in time to 2014. This is just since 2022. And the Russians, have looted museum after museum after museum in occupied Ukraine and have stolen some 7.8 million artifacts and paintings and irreplaceable cultural artifacts from Ukraine's museums. This is part of what Russian genocide looks like.
Well, it also tells you what are their priorities, right? What we are going to launch, and these attacks cost them somewhere around $100 million, and it goes way up. It depends on the composition of the platforms the Russians are using. But what are they prioritizing? Right? We know they've destroyed. Boy, the last number we had I was throwing around was 1,500. It's certainly over 2,000 by now in children, and including the chemotherapy, not just the ward, the room where the children received the chemotherapy treatments. They hit it with a cruise missile.
Yeah.
They have murdered a number of journalists. One, unfortunately, they aimed a Caliber cruise missile at her balcony. No one else in that building, right? Well, no one they've killed Ukrainian neuroscientists, a professor and his wife. We covered that the same way with a deliberate Caliber missile strike. Why am I throwing around personalities and clinics? They're going after what they can attack of Ukrainian culture. You know, it's been the bugbear of Russia forever that Ukraine is more prosperous, more intellectually gifted, with more industrious people. They need to murder that. That's their target.
Yeah. Well, it would be so easy if Russia would become a peaceful neighbor of what has always been a peaceful neighbor, Ukraine. But it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, there's one way. If you've got a really annoying dog next door, I think you can take it to the vet, and if you know what I'm saying. So I think we've talked about this before. You know, we know what Russia's strategic aims are, and they are to return the nation of Ukraine into a vassal satellite of Imperial Russia, right? That's Russia's strategic aim here. Ukraine's strategic aim must be taking the sword out of Russia's hand. Make sure that Russia doesn't have an army that can do this again. And the Russians are accommodating that aim. You know, we're going to talk later about what's going on in Kostiantynivka. And what's going on is the Russians are going to willingly enter another three-dimensional urban battle space, and they are going to suffer six-digit casualties. We'll get on that in detail in a minute. But as long as the Russians are fighting like this, it's going to be an own goal. This war is already an own goal for Putin.
There are so many clocks running, and you hope running out on Russia. And we're going to talk about those logistical clocks and economic clocks a little bit today as well. One thing I noticed after yesterday's attack on Kyiv, about 100,000 people without power. And even though we haven't even reached Midsummer's Day, I immediately began to think of the coming winter. If Russia continues to overwhelm Ukrainian air defense with drones and then use tens and tens more ballistic and cruise missiles, what chance does Ukrainian infrastructure have this fall and early winter to keep the lights and heat on again? We know what a terrible winter it was just in 2025 and 2026, Chuck.
Well, I think that there are new Ukrainian strike platforms that are going to come online. And I think that some of these attacks will be reciprocated. However, Ukraine has always avoided these sort of counterproductive strikes like we just saw. Hitting a monastery deliberately is counterproductive. Ukraine didn't attack the Victory Day parade. It certainly could have. It elected not to. It demonstrated later during the St. Petersburg Economic Forum that it could. attack these sorts of targets. And I want people to also recognize, you don't think that air defense in St. Petersburg was on its absolute maximum? Guys working 24 hours on 3-hour shifts so they could be fresh, and they still went ahead and sank a missile corvette. Well, they didn't sink it. They just burned it stem to stern. And, and hit the oil refineries, and they also hit a naval weapons depot. So Russia's ability to play defense, even on critical targets, it's evaporating. So I think Ukraine is going to give as well as good or better than it gets this winter. And there are several new Ukrainian intermediate range ballistic missiles coming online.
These are primarily developed by Firepoint. And whenever you see FP1 is a Firepoint cruise missile. FP5 is the Flamingo. And right now, FP7, 8, and 9 are all in development. It's FP9 that is the ballistic missile with the longest range and the ability to carry the heaviest payload. So, it's not as if Ukraine hasn't hit some power infrastructure inside Russia, but they have specifically targeted the power infrastructure of Russian oil refineries, pumping stations, and oil pipelines.
Yep, they have resisted the temptation to go eye for eye and tooth for tooth, and instead are going after Russia's cash register. And that's been much more effective because there's one factor in Russia that's never going to run out of the will to fight with other people's sons and daughters, and that's Putin. He's always going to be in for this. So you got to do a couple things here. You've got to make the war go on long enough so that it's going to have eventually political consequences, even for a dictator. But more importantly than that, because look, I promise you, Putin is going to be eaten by dogs in the street. And as the ravens shall pluck out his eyes, that is going to happen. But it's more likely that he's going to run out of money first. And Ukraine has been very good at that and striking those specific industrial targets that produce one of widgets or one of chemicals. And that's the way to win this war, not by avenging the outrages done to you.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about money for just a moment, and then we'll get to the maps and to some discussion about infantry manpower, logistics, and some news about frontline assault medics. In fact, we should get a medic on the show. I've always said they are the ones who know the most.
Mm-hmm. They
but
do.
Just to talk about money for a second, Chuck, Putin signed a declaration increasing the size of the Russian military forces, but without a path to getting all those needed recruits. So, except one, that is trying to pay more rubles to get someone to sign a military contract. It's not working. And without people willing to sign a contract, Putin is going to face that one thing he doesn't want to do, a mobilization.
Yeah, and it's extremely abstract for us to talk about how many rubles you get, and it's even a bit of an abstraction to talk about how many dollars that means. I would ask our listeners this: what amount of money would be necessary for me to give you, for you to understand completely that you'll be dead in 4 weeks? Okay, and you want to benefit your family. I mean, for me, that number's in the billions, okay? I would think about it for a couple $1 billion. But what are you going to get? And the other thing, and Alan, and you and I talk about this all the time, it's a far cry from paying somebody, whatever it is, 100,000 rubles, and that person goes to Ukraine, but that person does not arrive as a soldier. He arrives and we have seen, as an utterly unskilled civilian carrying a rifle. Completely unskilled. I mean, I won't go into the skills that an infantry soldier needs, but I could name 20 of them off the top of my head, and most civilians, including, I don't know, a lot of people who are outdoorsmen, they just don't have those skills.
Like I don't have those skills. But
Your land nav is pretty good, and your wilderness survival is pretty good. I just got to work on your marksmanship.
Yeah, a lot. Well, you can see the futility of the situation that Putin is in if you just look at occupied Crimea, where they recently increased the contract they would pay you if you signed to go fight in Ukraine. At the very same time, Russia is dismantling the naval headquarters at Sevastopol. So, weigh those two things. Even as a Russian in occupied Crimea, they're going to give me 1,000,000 rubles, but wait, they're not actually staying in town. They're going to the other side of the Black Sea, to Novorossiysk.
But they can't go any farther east, so they're the Black Sea command structure. And again, my information tells me they weren't ordered or authorized to relocate their headquarters. They're just consulting their own safety and doing it. And Crimea is the blue chip, so they are trying to induce suckers. I mean, Russians in Crimea to take the king's shilling and join the armed forces. But if you were one of the oppressed Russian-speaking minorities in eastern Ukraine who welcomed with open arms your Slavic big brother liberators, you already know they simply came into your house, grabbed you by the back of your collar, and dragged you into the armed forces. And those ethnic Russian units in Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson have died in their hundreds of thousands. So the whole casus belli of the war have been almost not extinguished, but let's say greatly diminished as a class of people, because the Russian army has consumed them and thrown them into the worst and most futile combat that is available. Yeah. Again, this is an imperial war fought by colonists. This is colonizing forces. Let's put a fine point on it.
Yep. It's exactly what they are. It's what they always have been. Well, as long as we're in occupied Crimea, let's tackle logistics. There are miles and miles long lines, double lines of Russian drivers wanting to fill up their ladas. One line to pay cash, one line, I guess, to pay with a credit card and get your eyedropper of allowed gasoline into your Lada. There's no gas in Crimea to be had. When is this logistical nightmare going to make its way to the front line?
Well, and there was just a person on with my greatly esteemed journalistic colleague, Andrew Mueller, definitely out of our league too, folks. I shouldn't say colleague, but he was saying that how robust the Russian economy is and how Ukraine's economy is actually about to collapse, to which I would only answer that Alan and I might have been to every gas station in Ukraine, and we never had to wait for gasoline. We never were in a line. They were never out of gasoline. You could buy as much as you wanted, whenever you wanted, plus eat a hot dog. Okay, so that, to me, is an economic indicator of what's going on. Not so good, right? Apparently, if you want to buy gas between St. Petersburg and Moscow, probably the most traveled stretch of highway in all of Russia, you've got a 3-mile gas line to deal with. Okay. From a country that was previously called a gas station with nukes by Senator John McCain, meaning all they had to sell is gasoline and refined petroleum products. So it doesn't look good. Who exactly is winning this war? So And again, just as you said, the Black Sea flotilla is pulling out of Sevastopol. The Tsar must be rolling over in his grave. I hope he is, actually.
Well, let's see. It would have been actually Nicholas II who lost most of the Russian Navy in 1905 to the Japanese. And this was the Baltic fleet that had to sail around the world because they'd already lost their Pacific fleet in Vladivostok, right?
That's absolutely. And the Japanese made short work of them. In fact, it was the first time that there was electronic warfare because the Japanese detected the Russian radio signals, and all they did was get their Morse code key and stick it down. And the Russians were utterly discombobulated.
That was way back in 1905. Well, and it's a bygone era. But just to talk again about logistics, when is this logistical nightmare going to rear its head on the front lines, on the Russian front line? Because, a lot of supplies still come through Crimea. A lot of supplies still come out of Donetsk and Donetsk City on the way across Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson.
Well, we can do the math here. So the Kerch Bridge is 12 miles long, a bit like the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. Sort of doesn't have a tunnel, but it crosses actually the Chesapeake Bridge Tunnel is longer, but 12 miles to go from Russia to Crimea that way. Well, the traffic across that bridge is down 81% because it's actually much more damaged than it looks. So by necessity, the Russians are taking, this is distance from Rostov-on-Don, a 480-mile detour to get to Kherson Oblast and also to come into Crimea from the north. Well, Ukraine has been pretty good about hitting Russian logistics that are proximate to the zero line. So let's say proximate being with 50 miles from the zero line. And as you get closer, so when you are within 25 miles, if it's moving, the Ukrainians are going to hit it. And, the Russians give almost as good as they get. But here's the but. You can't get gasoline in Crimea. And much more importantly, as Alan and I were talking about on the last show, you can't get diesel fuel. Without diesel fuel, you can't move your troops. You can't move your tanks, infantry fighting vehicles. The generators don't run that power your air defense systems, your sensors, etc. And as your air defense system loses its capabilities, your logistical situation is only going to get worse. Given what happened last night to our Russian listening guests in Crimea, tape your windows up tonight and rig for doo-doo storm, because I think that's going to happen. And what time is it? You know what, Alan? It's probably going to happen. It's probably happening right now.
Well, it's
quarter to 12.
It's approaching midnight in Kyiv right now.
Yeah.
And it looks like it's going to be a quiet night across Ukraine tonight. The just the other logistical thing to keep in mind, jet fuel. And this is where hitting the right refinery at the right time in the right place will make such a difference. And I don't know if Ukraine's targeting can be that precise.
Oh, I think it can. And I think it's informed by increasingly better and timely intelligence. So a lot of things in intelligence, you got to see something. You've got to have a secure means of transmitting it, and it's got to make its way through what's colloquially called the kill chain. The guy who controls those resources has to be able to get it and act on it. So how well is the logistics campaign going? Well, it's going so well that they can't find civilian truck drivers anymore because they're quitting, and they're having to put soldiers driving, semis and tanker trucks. And every soldier you put in the seat of a truck, he's not a trigger puller anymore. Uh, we see these increasingly desperate, let's just call them dysfunctions in Russian logistics, which they already eviscerated because during the Bakhmut era, they took every truck driver they could find and ground him up in the Battle of Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar. And they found they had no logisticians. With the truck drivers, they also killed the people who are trained in military supplies. I mean, logistician is a military occupational specialty, which means it's taught after boot camp. So, anyway.
Well, Ukraine is looking to do as often as possible to hit the archer, not the arrow. Whatever that archer may be, if it's on an airfield in occupied Crimea, if it's on an airfield in Belgorod, and I think that Ukraine is increasingly able to do that. And we are going to move to the map in Kostiantynivka pretty quickly here, but the other thing I wanted to point out to viewers is that as the summer goes on here, and some more cruise missiles, maybe ballistic missiles by the end of the year or early 2027, but certainly longer range cruise missiles. This gives Ukraine the opportunity to lengthen their target list. The list has always been long, but Ukraine's ability to match missiles to targets has been limited, and Ukraine has designed its way, manufactured its way out of that limitation.
Yeah, and the other thing we're going to see, we don't hear it reported very much right now, but if a Flamingo missile is going to hit a target, let's pick a modest number, 400 miles deep into Russia, and they have hit targets 1,000 miles into Russia. We can take the math of last night's Russian attack, and it's instructive. So of the 70 missiles that were fired, and generally that would probably mean, 45 cruise missiles and the remainder ballistic missiles, there were 600 slower moving drones. Okay. So we're talking 6 or 7 to 1. So what does that mean for a Ukrainian Flamingo attack? Well, it means one Flamingo and at least 7 other drones, projectiles, precision strike weapons that serve either as decoys or as weapons to strike intermediate air defense positions on the way to the primary target. All this is fancy war college talk for saying they don't just grab a bunch of flamingos and squirt them at refineries. Somebody sits there and does the battle math. How fast will the slower moving drones get there? Are they going to be there at the intermediate spots by the time the Flamingo rips past? Somebody sits there and calculates every mile of every ingress route of every important strike platform. And the Russians do the same. The difference is Ukraine is aiming at a refinery or a factory that makes chips for night vision devices. They're not aiming at cathedrals.
Right.
So that's what's so complex, and it's so right on to what you just said, Alan. As Ukraine's industrial capacity increases, as these FP8, 9, and 10s come online, it's just like what we saw, the Battle of Bakhmut 2 years ago. The drone environment, FPV, drones proximate to the battlescape, that has changed beyond our wildest dreams. It's so dense you can't even believe it. And that same mathematics is going to now pertain for deep Russian targets. Ukraine's sending more, and they're going to hit harder.
Yep. And Ukraine does not yet have ballistic missiles.
No. They have some Iskanders, et cetera, but those are, Soviet relics, really.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at the map in Kostiantynivka. The situation in Kostiantynivka is of grave concern to most people, and it is to us. And Russian infiltration, although I think pretty reliably reported somewhere between 100 and 250 in the urban landscape of Kostiantynivka. Look, there were that many in Kupiansk. Didn't cause a problem, did it? The Ukrainians swept them out. Why are 100 or 250 Russian troops in the middle of Kostiantynivka suddenly a huge problem?
Well, they aren't really. In the next week or so, we'll get a street map of Kostiantynivka here. You can see, Alan, that the zones of occasional contact are reaching out towards the urban areas. And again, I just want to remind everybody, you can see the Krivi Torets River goes through Kostiantynivka. It doesn't really kind of go through it. There are two separate urban areas, the Kostiantynivka proper and Ilinivka, which is there to the south. This complicates whatever Russia's goal is, right? Capture Kostiantynivka. Well, that means you've got two separate parts of this urban problem. If you are the invader, both of them have to be solved, right? You can't just capture what's north of the river, because then you're going to have the enemy in your rear, and ditto. If you just capture the south, you've got the Ukrainians in the north. The way to think of an urban battlefield is it's a fortress. Whoever gets there first, the defender, has incredible advantages. The Russians kind of turn this on their head because of all the resources that they have and are necessary to bring into a battle. The Russians do not give a flying fig Newton for how many people they kill. It's absolutely irrelevant. They will just kill as many people as are necessary. They're willing to put in whatever it takes for them to take a city. 150,000 dead to take Bakhmut, 250,000 casualties in Pokrovsk, and this is going to cost them, if they take it, and Alan, they may. They're willing to kill whoever it takes. It's going to take them at least 300,000 casualties to take Kostiantynivka, and I will invite everyone to please consult the map and look and see that there's only one way out of Kostiantynivka, and that is a tunnel. So to talk about a costly, hard to achieve objective that frankly will avail you nothing, here's example one in the text.
So maybe 300,000 to take
Yes.
a couple of these cities in the east, like Kostiantynivka, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, or at least 300,000.
Alan, I'd go farther, at least 200,000 for each of those delineated battle spaces.
Wow.
And you can see that, the battle line, which is a little hard to plant around Chasiv Yar, but after Bakhmut fell, the Russian forces in this area were so absolutely depleted that it is 2.5 years later and they still haven't pushed past Chasiv Yar. And the Battle of Bakhmut arguably, demonstratively, drove Prigozhin out of his head, and he mutinied, captured Rostov-on-Don, and charged at Moscow. The horror of the sacrifice of the meat waves that allowed the Russians to take Bakhmut. But what did that avail them? And Alan, we talked about it when they were still on Patrice Lumumba Boulevard. Yeah. We said, it isn't about Bakhmut, stupid. It's about Chasiv Yar. But they couldn't do it. And they didn't.
And remember, they rotated the Wagner forces out of Bakhmut and the regular Russian forces into Bakhmut. Then Wagner took off, or Prigozhin took off for Moscow. And so the troops that have made no real progress from Bakhmut to Kostiantynivka have been those regular Russian troops. They aren't the criminals and the felons that Putin and Prigozhin snatched from Russian prisons. And some of them, I think, became actually the best fighters in the Russian force. I mean, what did they have to lose, right?
Well, there is the other thing. You arrive with 9 days training. If you're still alive in 3 weeks, you have learned some extraordinarily valuable lessons, right? And you have watched military Darwinism in action. So you're a quick learner too. You know the difference between and you just woof crump. I used to say woof meant it was outgoing, crump meant it was coming in. You learn those little things. So they are learning, and the capability, the capacity for suffering of the average Russian foot soldier is almost unimaginable. And we have had people tell us that the Russians can and do fight effectively.
Yeah.
But from 100,000 feet looking down, the resources of the Russian military, and in particular, arguably the most important resource that any commanding general commands, are the men and women under his command. Because you can have all the great, you can have all the greatest fighter planes in the world. If you don't have Goose and Maverick, what do you got? Right? You could have the best armor in the world. What do you got? You've got all these tanks, and every time they park them, your crews leave all the hatches open. What do you got?
Someone who doesn't want to fight.
Someone who doesn't want to fight. I actually had a Vatnik come up and say, "Oh, you post the same thing again and again for clicks." And I said, "Yes, my little Putin poodle, because your boys just keep doing it again and again and again." And like, Alan, seriously, I'm not an armor officer, but I'm pretty sure when I see a tank depot at Fort Stewart, you don't walk away from that tank and leave the hatch open in the rain. Sergeant Major will be most unpleased.
Yeah.
But every Russian vehicle on the battlefield is left with its hatches wide open, and it's, please blow me up so I can fight another day.
Right. Look, if we go and look at the Kostiantynivka map again, both Russia and Ukraine face some logistical problems. I mean, the H-20 is the Ukrainian route of logistics and communication. The H-32 is the ground line of communication for the Russians. These are well within the gray zone. They are well within the kill zone on this map.
Yeah, we know that within 25 kilometers, so 10 kilometers is 6 miles. You guys can do the math. If you are in a truck on the direct route, you're going to get pummeled. In this case, though, and I'll also this is relevant. The Ukrainians have been able to read a topographic map since before Bakhmut. They knew that Kostiantynivka was going to be in play. They have been preparing that urban battle space, knowing with certitude that the enemy was going to come in and take it. To a Russian listening guest, you guys on the 12th floor of the hotel close to the train station, you should talk more quietly because there are microphones throughout every building that you would like to occupy. Many of the buildings have been pre-rigged with demolitions, and they only wait until there are maybe 100 or 200 of you in there to drop the building. So again, these are some of the many reasons why a conventionally led armed force will not rush into an urban battle space, but you go around it and you close it off, besiege it, and move on. And you don't even have to besiege it. You just cut it off and let it die of hunger and thirst. And the Russian military, the Soviet military, they were built to do that. That was the battle they thought they would subdue NATO with. But Alan, they can't pull it off anymore. And although I reported today in the subscribers battle groups, look, there is mounting evidence that Russian forces are being concentrated in around Kostiantynivka. There are reports from Ukrainian commanders that this is becoming the hottest area of the entire war. I take all of those as fact. They're simply reports right now. I think we can take them as fact. We had reports, Alan, you and I talked 10 days ago about troops leaving Kupiansk and being shipped down here. But, there's this one magic thing that Ukraine doesn't have to worry about. They must prepare for it. But it's highly unlikely that 6 brigade task groups of motor rifle troops and tanks are going to run a triple penetration op on Kostiantynivka, because the Russians can't move or concentrate those forces. They have no competent commanders to lead them. And those sorts of big city combined arms ground maneuver operations here in the early part of the 21st century, no one even knows if those are ever going to work again. I personally think they will, but certain technologies have to be invented. I don't know if they will work for the Russians in an environment where Ukraine is putting up 20,000 first-person drones a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when Russia first infiltrated Pokrovsk, the southernmost neighborhood here in Trevina, and then infiltrated Myrnarod, and we're just gradually making their way into Pokrovsk. And I said the same thing then that I'm going to say now. It's not because I have the basis to say it. It's because I hear others saying, as they said in Pokrovsk, it's not a matter of months now, it's a matter of weeks. And then they'll get down to saying it's a matter of days. And frankly, they will probably get down to saying it's a matter of hours. But in Pokrovsk, because of your understanding of how this warfare progresses, you are always the one saying it's months. It's months. But Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka, completely different urban maps.
Yes, absolutely. And Pokrovsk was essentially one contiguous urban area. This river makes a lot of difference here. I tell you what. So come September, the Russians will definitely have advanced into the urban area. But again, so it's, the Russians are always saying, well, the Ukrainians always say the city isn't worth anything anyway. And you always say that. But you know what? What the city is worth changes depending on the battle situation. And to our Russian listening guests, you're trying to take a city with one route of egress that is underground, a tunnel.
Two tunnels. One tunnel in, one tunnel out.
One tunnel in. That's just it. So I see the whole command structure perverted, Alan. The commands, take it. Someone's saying, sir, there's only one road out. And if judging from the last 2 cities we took, it looks like you're going to sustain 300,000 casualties here. Take it. I don't care.
So,
okay, but their job is to take the fortress cities, not just this one. And they're going to shoot their load on this one.
To say, I think that is a strong possibility. In other words, the drive to take the fortress cities succeeds in one place, Kostiantynivka.
Right, and we have another map that shows all of the fortress cities. Their goal is to take all of them this summer. That categorically is not going to happen. Will there be further encroachments into Kostiantynivka? Yes, there will. There are 200 Russian soldiers there now. Look, pick your favorite city and imagine the downtown area. Well, bigger even. 300 guys, and they are not in cohesive units. They've arrived in onesies and twosies, and they are not trained. The reason you train Rangers and paratroopers so well. It's because you expect them to land in disarray. Think of Band of Brothers, and they just link up. Who's the corporal? Who's the sergeant? Who's the lieutenant? And you build a new tactical unit on the fly at night on a confused, hot landing zone, and you take the fight to the enemy. You got 9 days of training on a bus from Moscow. What are you going to do?
Yeah. So the Russians have about 120 days, frankly, to get through Kostiantynivka and up along the arc of the H20 to take these fortress cities. Later this week, we're going to look at what's happening in and around Liman, because that is also integral to what the Russians want to do in taking the fortress cities this summer. Now, let me just ask one more thing about Kostiantynivka. If there's only one way in and only one way out, does that little word trap come to mind?
Yeah, it really does. And we talk about this all the time, and I am not the most battle experienced person in the world, but my first question always was, bullet flies over my head. I go, well, they missed. And then I think, where are they? Right. And then once I know where they are, my second question often happens within the same 3-second span. What are they trying to do? In this case, you get up every morning and you know what the Russians are trying to do. And they will oblige you by coming at you from where they came yesterday, the day before, the week before, along the same threat axis. So this sort of fighting for the Russians, and again, I mentioned the entire chain of command is absolutely perverted. You've got a political goal driving the tactics and perverting everything. So this also permits the Ukrainians to have a pretty good idea where the Russians are going to push. Kostiantynivka. So to a lesser extent, you have to be ready for everything, but I don't expect a big armored thrust to come out of Pokrovsk. I don't, on the Liman front, which of course you have to watch, and of course it is proximate to one of the fortress cities, Sloviansk. But again, that is the most underachieving section of Russian occupation troops in the entire war, right? They lost Liman 3 years ago, and they lost it in the Kharkiv offensive. They still haven't taken it back. And for them, and they are compelled, someone's telling them in Moscow, you drive to Sloviansk, and no one said, hey, look, there's a very dense band of forest, and there is a great big reservoir and a couple of rivers between us and Sloviansk. Ukraine is lucky that the monkeys are driving the bus, right? They are throwing resources at objectives that are not war winners. There is no key fortress city here that is going to lead to the collapse of the East. But they keep pushing, Alan, and they keep doing stupid things. And as Ukrainian soldiers told us, we are lucky they're so fucking stupid.
Yep. And they told us that in Kramatorsk.
In Kramatorsk, absolutely.
As just up the H20 here. Well, we just have to watch and see what's going to happen in Kostiantynivka. Maybe it will develop as quickly as some say, but I have a feeling, because we have seen this exact thing play out before, it will take the Russians longer and longer to achieve what they think they can achieve overnight. And I think a lot of it will have to do with logistics. The Ukrainians solve most of their logistical problems, and Russia has yet to do that. And the Ukrainians solve the logistical problems primarily with drones.
Yeah. And so again, it's, this is the quiet part of the drone revolution, is that Alan was telling me just before we went on that the majority of the logistical tasks now are being performed by unmanned ground vehicles. And interestingly enough, that is a technology that I know in a previous lifetime, DARPA had pretty much perfected and abandoned, right, in favor of manned logistical platforms. You would think that our experience in the Middle East would have maybe made them think a little differently about that. Hundreds and hundreds of American troops who were in convoys delivering fuel, including contractors, were killed because logistics were the target. Now, granted, that was an asymmetrical fight. This is an asymmetrical fight as well, but more along conventional lines. But the use of unmanned platforms, both in the air, on the surface, under the surface, and in logistical, roles. And those platforms, Ukraine is not only producing them in sufficient bulk, so now the majority of their logistics are carried out by it. The number one killing weapon on the battlefield is the first-person drone. And these weapons are increasingly being guided to target by their own internal algorithms. So it's one thing to let's call it 15,000 drones a day. It's one thing to throw them up into a networked command and control network, and throws it up, and a drone operator 15 miles in the rear, it comes up on his ocular set, and he guides it in to a target, or he's got the grid coordinates and he flies to that target. That's what's going on now for the most part. Pretty soon, you just need an infantryman to throw 5 of those up in the air. They turn their cameras on, and it's like throwing a tennis ball for a fox terrier. He's going to go get it. And that is what the Russians are going to have to face. That's their casualty curve. Cover in an urban engagement, there isn't a pane of glass left in Kostiantynivka. If you're in the building, it's going to fly in and eat your lunch.
Well, as I say, we'll wait and see what happens. One thing Ukraine is better at than the Russians, and we've talked about this before. I don't know why the Russians can't figure it out, but it's heavy lift drones. The Ukrainians designed the first heavy lift drones, again, with specific missions in mind, including logistics missions, so that they could pack and deliver absolutely essential supplies in as heavy a package as possible. A lot of medical supplies, not just bullets, not just nutrition, not just water, but really essential medical supplies. I had the opportunity to speak to and listen to an assault medic just over the weekend. And, put yourself in the place of a Ukrainian soldier. There is no such thing as a golden hour any longer. She was telling me that you are talking about stabilizing a wounded Ukrainian soldier on the front line for days or even weeks before there's an evacuation window. And sometimes that evacuation window depends on the weather. And I mean, you can imagine yourself in that situation, Chuck. I mean, I guess I can too in a way, but the training that an assault medic needs to preserve that soldier's life today is completely different than the training they needed even 5 years ago. I mean, you cannot helivac a soldier out if you aren't using the weather to conceal your evacuation. The Russians are going to strike any vehicle, even with a red cross on it. Those ground robots designed for evacuation, they work, but it's one at a time.
Yeah, they're slower. And, in my day, of course, we have corpsmen in the SEALs who go through years of medical training. But in my day, you could pretty much direct pressure, tourniquet it out, get him on his side, shock position, and move him. And you call Pedro, which is the the Air Force pararescue guys. They're right in. You can get them out, and that was a luxury that, look, I knew we had because our superiority started in outer space. We had total air superiority. We could get a helicopter in and out, and that absolutely isn't the case now. But importantly, even our well-trained corpsmen would be pretty hard pressed to keep one of us alive over the course of 2 weeks. And not to get too graphic about it, we're talking about traumatic amputations. We're talking about subdural hematoma, which means a concussive event that is causing your brain to swell. Look, these are medical issues that are beyond the average frogman. But there's another point here to be made. On the other side of the equation, we have seen that, if you are wounded in the Russian army, you have a 60% chance of succumbing to that wound, no matter what it is. Because on the other side of the coin, there is no medical care for a wounded Russian soldier, and there is no evacuation unless you are a commissioned officer. Wow, so that's some good unit integrity. It's not just that they get better food, it's like they got a chance of living. So, my hat's off, and this was a female medic you were talking to. God bless her.
I hope we can get her and a couple of other medics, and I'd love to have our friend Yuri from Kramatorsk. We've got to track him down on this show as guests. The medical care that she described to me, Ukrainian soldiers are trained how to deliver this care, not just the corpsmen. Okay, I mean, she actually foresees the day where every soldier must be trained in assault line medicine, and it means she concentrates on instructing soldiers in her units how to clean wounds. That's number one. How to keep those wounds clean, and then what drugs are absolutely necessary, and what nutrition is necessary to keep these soldiers alive, as I say, for days and sometimes for weeks. And it's the most common injuries: shrapnel, edema. This is if you survive your encounter with a suicide drone. And that shrapnel can come from a drone, it can come from a glide bomb, or it can come from an artillery shell or a tank shell. So, it's a whole new world every direction you look on the zero line.
Yeah, and you're talking about, I would say in the Russian case, the luxury of training. And I know that, in the United States, even, I never want to say even if you are just in the infantry, but you receive weeks and weeks of advanced first aid training. And in the teams where they spent millions of dollars training us, look, we had training cycles where you go spend 3 weeks and learn trauma medicine. I don't think I'm very good at it anymore, but how to stitch people up, how to clamp an artery, how to treat a sucking chest wound. We had all of that, and it was considered necessary, even just for Uncle Sam's economic reasons. You spend all this money training these guys, you don't have somebody bleed out because he got his, anyway. But it shows that, Ukraine cares that much about their troops, and they realize that the men and women serving the country are vital. That is the most critical resource. It doesn't matter if you have a weapon system if you don't have anyone to fight it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're taking back terrain. It doesn't matter if you've got 1 million drones if you've got no one to fly them. So,
Well, once again, in an hour here on Indications and Warnings, we come to that basic difference between Ukrainians fighting for their lives and Russians fighting for God knows what. They certainly have no idea for their million ruble contract, but not fighting out of some loyalty to Putin, not fighting for any higher cause whatsoever, but inflicting the kinds of wounds on a peaceful nation and a peaceful people that begin in the neighborhoods of Kiev and Kharkiv, and that stretch through more than 2,000 religious sites and cultural sites in Ukraine. And finally, that brings us to a front line in Kostiantynivka, where I am sure we will be 2 weeks from now, and quite likely a month from now as well, Chuck.
Yeah, this is going to be the center, certainly, of the summer. And again, top line, look, I see some Russian advances happening there. They're not imminent. They won't be. There won't be any coup de main here. It's just not going to happen that way. It's going to be doorknob to doorknob, and we'll see. But this is our. We'll be talking about this a lot more.
Chuck and I will be back this week. We will keep pace with the battles in the east here, and this will also give you a chance to catch up with any past episodes that you might want to see. Remember, Indications and Warnings is its own channel now. We're no longer under an umbrella that hid essentially what we were doing. So give us a like, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Please recommend this channel to friends and others who want to know more about how Ukraine is going to fight through this winter and hopefully turn the tide on the Russians. Until then, thanks, Chuck, and Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.